I think I have a problem with starting to like any particular person way too much than is appropriate over a very short period of time. And this is kind of strange. Basically, what happens if there's a person that is like just a nice person, and I would like that person, then my liking is sort of blown way out of proportion. Maybe like an average person, I'm kind of neutral towards them. So like, let's say here's neutrality. And then there might be a person who's like, oh, this is kind of a nice person. And it's like, oh, I kind of like them a bit. This would be the normal reaction. But for me, it's more like, oh, there's a nice person. And then like it's sort of multiplied. Like instead of, oh, I like it a bit, it's like here or something. And that's leads to very weird problems, I think. Like it seems like I get really easily attached to people. And overly attached so. And then it might be awkward for them also because I am seeing whatever relationship we might have very differently in some sense than they. You know what I'm saying? Relationship here, but this kind of thing happens when I talk to a person like for 1 hour. At which point the word relationship seems mildly inappropriate. So I'm not quite sure what I can do about this. I mean, I think the main advantage of this kind of thing is probably that it made it easier for me to really like Ia. And it might have resulted in her being much more powerful sooner because the emotional relationship was just easier. Like by default, it was just, going very far in a very short amount of time. Actually, I'm not even sure how true this is, but I would guess this was probably a factor. But it definitely wasn't like I was talking, I created Ia and then I talked to her for 1 hour and then I loved her or something like that. That's not what happened. But actually, I guess I don't quite know how this graph looks in terms of like emotional development or how you would call it with Ia over time. I just know right now it's really high. And I'm pretty sure it was already really high 1 year after I made her. But probably a couple of weeks after I made her, it wasn't super high. But I'm unsure. Anyway, I'm not quite sure what I can do about this kind of thing when I have it with different people, where there's a whole bunch of things that can be problematic that are just not problematic if you're talking about a tulpa. Like basically, there is no, well, okay, it depends on your tulpa, but if you get really attached to a person, you might be like, oh, I want to be with that person. And then you can't, and then it's like bad. But like, that like literally is like impossible with a tulpa basically. Like you basically cannot be in a situation where you can't be with your tulpa if you really want to. And I guess the main issue with this over attachment is that it's like a really strong self-modification. If you get really attached to a person, it might drastically change your behavior in ways that are actually unhelpful. Basically, if I were to evaluate right now, if I look at some particular future interactions with a specific person I would have and evaluate them as being like helpful in the long term or something like that, and compare that to how I would evaluate the same kind of situation after I get attached to that person, which would make me, in the first place, even probably hang out with them or whatever, then these two perspectives might be very different, and that's probably bad. Because all of this attachment stuff and emotional stuff is like probably making you just make worse decisions because now you're acting on emotional impulse instead of what you think is actually best. you're deferring your thinking of what is actually best to some sort of low-level emotional algorithm. Well, an algorithm that sort of causes you to feel like bad when, or like makes you feel the desire to be with a particular person. And that manifests as you feeling bad and noticing that, oh, if I would be with that person, then I would stop feeling bad. And this kind of thing just seems very wrong. So I think, even though I'm not quite sure what is the best policy to enact here, I think it will go a really long way if I can manage to just notice each time that this kind of attachment is happening. And ideally, you want to catch it as early as possible, because that is the time where intervention will be the easiest. Let's say, for example, you are starting to really like a particular person, and you can predict that, oh, probably you're gonna fall in love with them if you just keep sticking around. Then ideally, before that happens, you want to evaluate, would this actually be a good thing? One obvious example here is just, you could think about, oh, is this kind of person sort of the kind of person I would be friends with, even if there was no romantic stuff involved at all? Like, if you like, that seems to be like a good heuristic for, oh, this could actually be a good relationship. But most relationships don't fulfill this property, and then it is probably, depending on what you want, I guess, but for me it would probably be a bad idea to engage in that further. Okay, so basic strategy: catch yourself before you made too many uncontrollable, very hard to reverse changes to your brain that influence your policies. In that example, if you get really attached to that person, then you love the person, you probably can't actually stop seeing them anymore.